Reborn 1991. My fiance's cruelty broke me, so I fought back and built a new life. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to get a second chance at life? To right the wrongs and change your fate? Well, in this story, that's exactly what happens. Follow along as Emma takes control of her destiny, faces the consequences of past actions, and watches as everything she once knew falls apart. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with others who might love it too. Your support means a lot and helps us bring more amazing stories like this one to life. When I agreed to the arranged marriage with Andrew Carter, the news of the union between the prominent Carter and Johnson families spread like wildfire across Riverdale. The city was abuzz with speculation, and the media quickly assumed that my fiancé was Andrew Carter, the eldest son. No one even thought to consider his younger brother, Daniel Carter. It was almost ironic how, in my previous life, I believed I had my future all mapped out. I thought I understood my place in the world and the people around me, but I couldn't have been more wrong. For years, I endured endless humiliation and heartbreak, convinced that my unwavering love for Andrew would eventually pay off. I told myself that if I held on just a little longer, he would finally notice me, appreciate me, and love me back. But that dream was shattered in the cruelest way. The events of that fateful day are still etched into my memory. It was a stormy evening, with rain pouring down in icy sheets. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil inside me as I overheard a conversation that tore my heart apart. Andrew and Anna, the woman he truly cared for, were plotting together. Their plan was simple yet devastating. They intended to use me one last time to secure Andrew's position as the Carter family heir. Hearing their cold and calculated words was like a dagger plunging into my chest. Despite the overwhelming pain, I confronted Andrew, desperate for the truth. But instead of showing even a shred of remorse, he laughed in my face. His words cut through me like a blade. "You were always just a pawn, Emma. That's all you've ever been." Blinded by heartbreak, I fled into the raging storm, unable to process the betrayal. The cold rain soaked me to the bone as I ran aimlessly, my vision blurred by tears. My feet carried me to the cliffs overlooking the ocean, a place that had once brought me peace. But that night, it became my end. I slipped on the wet rocks, and the next thing I knew, I was falling. The world around me became a blur, the roar of the ocean swallowed everything. And then there was silence. Dark, endless silence. When I opened my eyes again, I was no longer the broken, betrayed woman from that tragic night. I found myself back in my teenage body, standing outside my family's mansion. In my hands, I clutched an invitation to my engagement party with Andrew. At first, I thought it was a cruel, vivid dream. But as I looked around and saw familiar faces I hadn't seen in years, the truth sank in. I had been given a second chance. This was no dream. It was a rebirth, a gift from the universe. With this new beginning came a surge of determination. I promised myself that I would not waste this opportunity by repeating the mistakes of my past. No longer would I live for the approval of others who saw me as nothing more than a stepping stone. This time, I would take control of my destiny, and I would make sure those who hurt me felt the weight of their actions. This wasn't just about starting over. It was about claiming the justice I had been denied in my first life. A few days later, I sat in a small cafe where I had just finished meeting with a reporter I had invited, Deanne Tang. I had plans to reshape my future, and sharing my story was just one step. But just as I was preparing to leave, I saw Andrew and his group of friends approaching. I instinctively decided to ignore them, assuming they would do what they always did, treat me as if I were invisible. But to my surprise, Andrew did something entirely unexpected. He walked directly up to me, his confident stride and piercing gaze catching me off guard. My new life had barely begun, and it seemed fate was already testing me. "Emma Johnson, Andrew Carter's voice rang out cold and sharp, cutting through the light chatter of the cafe. Are you so desperate and unwanted that you had to come up with this pathetic idea of dragging the media into this? Do you really think you can force me into marriage? His words were like icy daggers, and the disdain in his eyes was almost unbearable. Don't even dream about it. I'll never marry you, he added, his tone unyielding and filled with contempt. The sharpness of his words made my chest ache, but I clenched my fist, determined not to show any weakness. I opened my mouth, instinctively wanting to defend myself, but before I could utter a single word, one of Andrew's friends interjected. Andrew, the friend said with a smirk. Wasn't that Diane Tang, the entertainment gossip reporter, sitting with her just now? You know, the one who's always chasing the juiciest stories in Riverdale? His voice was loud enough for everyone in the cafe to hear, and several heads turned toward us. At those words, I could see Andrew's expression harden further, the disdain in his gaze now accompanied by a chilling anger. Andrew's piercing eyes locked onto mine, colder than I'd ever seen them. He seemed convinced that I had deliberately leaked our engagement news to the media. I felt the familiar sting of tears threatening to blur my vision, but I blinked them away quickly. When I looked at him again, my eyes were calm and steady, masking the turmoil within me. You're mistaken, I said firmly. I only met with the reporter to clarify that the engagement isn't with you, it's with Daniel. The words left my mouth with deliberate precision, but they were immediately met with mocking laughter. Andrew's friends, ever eager to humiliate me, found the situation hilarious. One of them leaned forward with a cruel smirk. Emma, come on! Don't make us laugh, he sneered. Everyone knows you've been obsessed with Andrew for years. You've been chasing after him like a lovesick puppy. And now you expect us to believe you were just clarifying things with a reporter? Please, you're just trying to stir up rumors again. His words, filled with mockery, made the small crowd of onlookers chuckle quietly, their amusement cutting through the air like a blade. Andrew, however, wasn't laughing. His eyes narrowed, his jaw tightened, and his words came out sharper than ever. Emma Johnson, lying has become second nature to you, hasn't it? Everyone in Riverdale knows how you've clung to me all these years, acting like you couldn't survive without me. Who else would you even consider marrying? He paused, his gaze burning into me with unrelenting scorn. Fine, he added bitterly. I won't expose your lies publicly. You can keep pretending to be my fiancé if it helps your pride. But don't expect anything from me. You don't deserve it. I stared at him, stunned by the venom in his words. In my past life, Andrew had been cold toward the arranged marriage, but he had never openly opposed it. His indifference had given me false hope, leading me to believe that one day he might care for me. But this time, his hostility was undeniable, and I couldn't help but wonder what had changed. The Andrew before me wasn't the same man I had known, or maybe I was just seeing him more clearly now. Either way, his disdain no longer left me longing for his approval. It only strengthened my resolve. As the harshness of his words hung in the air, the cafe suddenly grew quiet. The murmurs and laughter stopped as everyone turned toward the entrance. I followed their gazes and saw her. Anna Lewis, Andrew's so-called true love. She stood at the door, her delicate features painted with an expression of sorrow and vulnerability. Her wide, tear-filled eyes darted between Andrew and me as if trying to piece together what she had just walked into. The air grew heavy with tension as her presence added another layer of complexity to an already unbearable moment. Anna walked toward me slowly, her steps unsteady and hesitant. As she approached, she slipped a ring off her finger and gently placed it in my hand. Her voice trembled as she spoke. I only found out about your engagement through the news. It wouldn't be right for me to keep this ring that Andrew gave me. Her words were soft, yet each one carried a weight I couldn't ignore. As she paused, her voice faltered, and she added, "But the ring has both of our names engraved on it. Andrew had it engraved himself. I hope you don't mind." She forced a weak smile, though her glistening eyes betrayed her sorrow. "Emma, I wish you both happiness," she said, her voice breaking as tears spilled down her cheeks. She looked as though the effort of standing was too much for her. her fragile frame trembling. Just as she turned to leave, her legs wavered and she stumbled toward the door. Before I could process what was happening, Andrew's expression shifted from disdain to alarm. Without a second thought, he snatched the ring from my hand and pushed me aside, rushing toward Anna. His hands reached out to steady her, and he gathered her into his arms as though she might shatter. Concern etched across his face. He murmured her name repeatedly, his voice filled with worry. Anna, ever delicate and helpless, rested her head against Andrew's chest. But as she lifted her gaze toward me, the sorrow on her face gave way to something else, a glint of triumph. It was subtle but unmistakable. Her lips barely curved into a smirk before she turned her face away, playing her role of the heartbroken damsel to perfection. Andrew, visibly shaken, prepared to take her to the hospital, his protective instincts in full force, but before they could leave, Anna gently pushed herself upright, wobbling slightly as Andrew held her steady. She walked toward me with Andrew's arm firmly supporting her, her face now composed but lined with worry. "Miss Johnson," she began, her voice soft and apologetic, "please don't misunderstand." Her gaze met mine, steady yet layered with unspoken challenge. "Andrew is only concerned about me because I've been unwell. He always has been. After all, I've been the most important person in his life for years. But," she added with a smile so sweet it stung, "there's nothing between us anymore. I hope you don't take it the wrong way." Her words were like poison wrapped in honey, and I could feel the eyes of everyone around us watching, waiting for my reaction. The cafe had grown uncomfortably quiet, except for the faint whispers and exchanged glances among the spectators. It was no secret that I had spent years pining for Andrew. In my previous life, moments like this had always pushed me to the edge. I would lose control, yelling and creating a scene, desperate to hold on to the illusion that he might someday love me back. But this time was different. I wasn't the same person anymore. Instead of giving in to their expectations, I remained calm, my expression neutral. I simply looked at them, Andrew cradling Anna as though she were the most precious thing in the world, and said nothing. Andrew seemed taken aback by my lack of reaction. His eyes searched mine as though trying to decipher why I wasn't throwing the tantrum he had clearly anticipated. Frustration flickered across his face, and he finally released the arm he had wrapped around Anna. Straightening himself, he turned back to me, his tone sharp and tinged with embarrassment. "At least you're smart enough not to hurt Anna this time," he said coldly. "If you had, I wouldn't have let you off so easily." His words were meant to wound, but they didn't. Not this time. Instead, I found myself almost amused by how predictable he had become. Before I could respond, Andrew bent down slightly to adjust Anna's position in his arms, his attention fully on her once again. The crowd around us began murmuring softly, their interest in the spectacle fading. I stayed rooted in place, my calm exterior unbroken. Deep down, I knew this moment wasn't a loss for me, it was a lesson. Andrew's actions, Anna's performance, and the whispers of those watching were all reminders of how far I had come. The person I once was would have begged for Andrew's love. But now, I saw them for what they truly were. Players in a game I no longer cared to win. Andrew scooped Anna into his arms effortlessly, carrying her out of the cafe as if she were made of glass. Just before they reached the door, Anna shifted slightly and looped her arms around his neck. Her head rested gently against his shoulder, and she turned to glance at me. Her voice was soft, almost kind, but her eyes gleamed with triumph. "Andrew, it's so hard to get a cab around here," she said with a sweet smile. "Why don't we give Miss Johnson a ride home?" Her suggestion was framed with sincerity, but the subtle challenge in her tone was unmistakable. Andrew stopped mid-step, clearly annoyed by the idea. The warmth in his eyes as he looked at Anna moments earlier vanished as soon as he turned to me. His expression hardened, and his voice became sharp. "Emma Johnson, are you deaf?" he snapped. "Didn't you hear what Anna said? Hurry up and get in. I'll take you home." His impatience was evident, and the disdain in his tone was like a slap in the face. For a moment, I wanted to refuse, to walk away and let them revel in their theatrics. But as I noticed the curious eyes of the cafe patrons and remembered that my phone was ruined from spilled coffee, I had no choice. I couldn't afford to create more rumors. Reluctantly, I followed them. In the parking lot, Andrew opened the car door and carefully placed Anna in the front passenger seat. He even leaned over to fasten her seatbelt, his actions tender and deliberate. As he pulled away, Anna tilted her head and her lips brushed against his cheek. Their eyes met for a brief second, and then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, they kissed. The scene was so rehearsed it felt almost theatrical. I arched an eyebrow but said nothing, sliding silently into the back seat and shutting the door behind me. The sound of the door closing seemed to jolt Andrew back to reality. He abruptly pulled away from Anna and turned to glance at me. His expression was difficult to read, caught somewhere between irritation and discomfort. His hand lingered near Anna's shoulder as though ready to shield her from some imagined outburst on my part. But when his gaze met mine, he froze. I was leaning back calmly, resting my chin on my hand, my expression utterly indifferent. His hand hovered awkwardly for a moment before he clenched his jaw and stormed over to the driver's seat, slamming the door shut behind him. As the car roared to life, Anna's gaze flickered to a small sticker on the dashboard. She giggled, pointing at it with exaggerated delight. "Andrew, isn't this the sticker I put on your car that day as a joke?" she asked, her voice light and playful but loud enough for me to hear from the back. The sticker read, "Anna's reserved seat. No trespassing." She pretended to be embarrassed, laughing softly. "I can't believe you still have it. Won't it make Miss Johnson misunderstand? Maybe I should take it off." Her fingers grazed the edge of the sticker, but she made no real effort to remove it. Instead, she turned her head slightly and looked at me, her eyes full of mischief and provocation. In my previous life, her antics would have driven me mad. I would have taken the bait, my emotions spiraling out of control as I fought to defend my place in Andrew's life. But now, watching her childish games unfold, I felt nothing but indifference. Her attempts to provoke me felt empty, like a poorly written play I'd seen too many times. I let my gaze drift out the window, ignoring her entirely. Andrew, however, seemed unsettled. He glanced at me through the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, his voice cut through the silence. "Take it off?" he repeated, his tone sharper than necessary, as though he were addressing Anna. But his eyes flicked to me once more. I didn't bother to respond. Their drama no longer held any power over me. The car ride felt suffocating, not because of the tension, but because I realized how small their world was, built on lies, manipulation, and performances for an audience that no longer included me. I leaned back in my seat, feeling strangely detached, as though I were watching their lives from the outside. For the first time, I understood that they could no longer control my emotions, and that realization felt like freedom. "No way! The front seat belongs to you, Anna," Andrew said firmly, his tone almost reverent. "It always has, and no one else should even think about sitting there." His words were deliberate, as if to etch his loyalty into the air between us. I stayed silent, my gaze fixed out the window as the car sped through the quiet streets. When we arrived at my apartment complex, I was ready to leave without a backward glance. But to my surprise, Andrew parked the car and got out following me. I stopped momentarily, confused by his actions. His footsteps echoed behind me as I walked toward the entrance of the building. Turning my head slightly, I watched him approach, his face set in a mix of arrogance and irritation. Before I could speak, he grabbed my arm, halting my steps. His grip was firm but not harsh, and his other hand held out a small object. "Take this," he said, thrusting a brooch into my palm. The disdain in his voice was impossible to miss. "Accept my gift and stop causing trouble," he continued, his words dripping with condescension. "I'm allowing you to carry the title of my fiancé in public, but don't overstep your bounds. Don't ever upset Anna or make her uncomfortable, and don't think that acting indifferent like you did today will catch my attention. My heart belongs to Anna, and it always will. Don't harbor any illusions." Without waiting for a response, Andrew spun on his heel and walked away, his back radiating self-assured confidence. I glanced down at the brooch in my hand and couldn't help but smirk at the irony. I recognized it immediately. This brooch was a custom piece that came as a complimentary gift with a high-end luxury watch, the same watch I had seen Anna flaunting earlier that day. Shaking my head, I walked to the trash can near the entrance and casually tossed the brooch inside. It didn't deserve more than that. When I got home, I washed up and tried to settle into bed, but sleep eluded me. My mind was restless, filled with fragmented thoughts of the past and questions about the present. In my previous life, Anna had left the country by this time, disappearing entirely from our lives, yet here she was, still firmly rooted in this timeline, showing no signs of leaving. What had changed? Was it possible that she, too, had been reborn? The idea sent a shiver down my spine. If Anna remembered everything, would she try to rewrite her own story as well? As these thoughts consumed me, exhaustion eventually took over, and I drifted off into an uneasy sleep. Memories of my past life surfaced like haunting specters in my dreams. I remembered the painful choices I had made, one after another. Back then, I had agreed to the engagement with Andrew, believing it was my duty to secure the alliance between the Carter and Johnson families. But behind closed doors, Andrew's father had orchestrated a meeting with Anna, offering her a staggering $5 million to leave the country and sever ties with his son. Anna had taken the money and left, but not before sowing seeds of doubt and betrayal. She spread rumors that I had forced her out to claim Andrew for myself. Andrew believed her lies without question, and in retaliation, he married me, only to shatter my hopes again and again, punishing me for a crime I didn't commit. The next morning, as sunlight poured into my room, I pulled myself out of bed and stepped into the living room. My parents were chatting at the breakfast table, their conversation casual yet laced with importance. My mother mentioned that Andrew's older brother, Christopher, would be returning home today, and tonight's banquet would serve not only as our engagement party, but also as a welcome celebration for him. My heart clenched at the memory. In my past life, Christopher's private jet had crashed on this very day, robbing him of his life. This time I had taken precautions. Days ago, I warned Christopher not to take the private jet. The thought of averting his tragic fate gave me a flicker of hope, but unease still gnawed at the edges of my mind. Unable to sit still, I decided to visit the seaside villa, a place that had always been my sanctuary. The villa's rose garden, a labor of love I had nurtured since childhood, had always been my refuge when the world felt overwhelming. I had started the garden for Andrew, believing his passing remark about roses being his favorite flower. For years, I collected rare rose seeds, planting them with care and devotion. Over time, the garden transformed into a lush, vibrant paradise, a testament to my misguided love. As I approached the villa, I could almost smell the sweet fragrance of the roses, and for a moment I felt a flicker of calm, but the calm shattered the moment I saw the garden. What greeted me was devastation. Rows of roses had been trampled and torn apart, their petals scattered like fallen soldiers after a battle. Only a few blooms in the far corners remained untouched. My chest tightened as I stepped out of the car, my eyes scanning the wreckage in disbelief. Years of work, of dedication, ruined in an instant. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone to call the police. Before I could dial, the faint sound of laughter drifted through the air. I froze, the familiar voices piercing through my shock. Following the sound, I rounded the corner and found Andrew sitting on a swing entwined with roses. My roses. Beside him, Anna leaned against him, her giggle light and carefree as if they were in a scene from a romance film. Fury bubbled inside me, and without thinking, I marched toward them. Reaching the swing, I grabbed the ropes and stopped it abruptly, startling them both. My voice was sharp and demanding as I glared at them. Who gave you permission to be here? And who told you it was okay to destroy my rose garden? Anna's laughter faded immediately, replaced by a look of wide-eyed innocence. She clasped her hands in front of her, her voice trembling with practiced sweetness. Miss Johnson, I'm so sorry, she began, her tone dripping with false remorse. It's all my fault. I told Andrew I loved rose swings, and he brought me here to make one for me. He even hurt his hands on the thorns while building it. If you're angry, blame me, not him. Her words were calculated, her doe-eyed expression daring me to look unreasonable. Andrew stepped in front of Anna, shielding her as if I were a threat. His gaze bore into mine, filled with irritation and disdain. Emma Johnson, are you done? He snapped, his tone condescending. It's just a few roses. Do you really have to be this petty? Everyone knows you planted this garden for me anyway. I only used a few flowers. Why are you acting like it's the end of the world? Are you jealous because I made a swing for Anna? His mocking tone sliced through me, but I refused to let it show. Anna, ever the performer, stepped off the swing with a soft sigh. Miss Johnson, I'm finished with the swing anyway, she said, her voice filled with feigned kindness. Consider it yours again. But as she stepped away, she subtly loosened the knot securing the swing to the frame. Her movements were so calculated that I almost didn't catch them. Fury simmered beneath my calm exterior. As I watched her walk away, her innocent facade unshaken. As Anna stepped away, she reached out as if to steady me, but instead gave me a subtle push toward the swing. Without the knot securing it, the swing collapsed instantly. The wooden frame came crashing down, and before I could react, a heavy plank struck my shin. Pain shot through me as I stumbled and fell to the ground. Meanwhile, Andrew instinctively pulled Anna into his arms, shielding her as if she were in imminent danger. The sharp pain left me disoriented, and I struggled to make sense of what was happening. Through blurred vision, I saw Anna clinging to Andrew's arm, her voice trembling with a mix of feigned guilt and indignation. "Miss Johnson," she began, her tone dripping with false concern. "I already said the swing and the roses are yours. How could you destroy the swing and hurt yourself just to frame me? Andrew made that swing for me with so much care. How could you be so heartless?" Andrew's eyes flicked toward my injury, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw concern in his gaze. He even took a small step toward me as if to help. But Anna tightened her grip on his arm, and whatever sympathy he might have felt vanished. His expression hardened and his anger flared. When I reached out to him for help, he stepped on my hand, pinning it to the ground with deliberate cruelty. "Emma Johnson," he spat, his voice seething with contempt. "Are you that desperate to marry me? So desperate you'd hurt yourself to make Anna look bad? You've gone too far this time, and I won't tolerate it." He picked up a piece of the broken swing and slammed it against my waist. The impact sent a jolt of pain through my entire body, but Andrew wasn't finished. He crushed my phone under his foot, his movements sharp and decisive. "Kneel," he commanded coldly. "Kneel before Anna and apologize. You don't get to stand until she forgives you." I looked up at him in shock, my entire body trembling from the pain and humiliation. When I didn't respond immediately, his frustration grew. He kicked me again, his voice sharp and menacing. "Emma Johnson, don't forget tonight is supposed to be our engagement party. But if you don't kneel now, there won't be a groom waiting for you. It's your choice. Grovel like a dog or lose everything." Despite the searing pain in my body, I forced myself to sit up. My voice, though quiet, was steady and unyielding as I met his gaze. "I've told you before," I said, each word deliberate. "I'm not marrying you, and I will never apologize to her." My refusal seemed to momentarily shake him. Andrew's anger faltered, and a flicker of doubt crossed his face. But before he could say anything, his phone chimed with an incoming message. After reading the text, his hesitation disappeared, replaced by smug arrogance. He waved his phone at me, his tone dripping with mockery. "Emma Johnson, you almost had me fooled," he sneered. "You claim you don't want to marry me, yet you ordered Manchester roses for tonight. Everyone knows they're my favorite. Do you still want to deny that you're trying to win me over?" I opened my mouth to explain that the roses were for Christopher, who also loved them. But Andrew cut me off before I could speak. With a final glance of disgust, he said, "Since you won't kneel and apologize, I'll take Anna to the party first. Let's see how you handle the humiliation when you show up alone." And with that, he turned and walked away with Anna, leaving me behind in pain and disbelief. "You can do it at the party in front of everyone," Andrew said coldly, his voice devoid of any warmth. "If you don't kneel, there will be no groom at this engagement." His words were a final slap of humiliation, and as he turned to leave, he added without looking back, "Anna and I, along with the guests, will be waiting for you at the engagement party." With that, he carried Anna in his arms and walked away, leaving me lying there in pain and despair. The sharp ache in my lower back was relentless, but it was nothing compared to the suffocating helplessness consuming me. My vision blurred, and I could feel my strength waning. The world seemed to close in around me, and the last thing I saw was their retreating figures. The pain, both physical and emotional, was too much to bear. Darkness overtook me, and I passed out, unaware of what was happening around me. What I didn't see was a tall, slender figure stepping out of the shadows. The man's sharp eyes took in the scene with a mix of anger and concern. Without hesitation, he approached my unconscious form, his movements calm but purposeful. He bent down, carefully scooped me into his arms, and carried me away. His steps were steady, and his protective grip shielded me from further harm. When I finally opened my eyes, the sharp scent of disinfectant filled my nose, and I realized I was lying in a hospital bed. The sterile white walls and the faint hum of medical equipment told me where I was. I tried to shift slightly, but a searing pain shot through my body, forcing a soft cry from my lips. "Don't move," a deep, magnetic voice instructed, startling me. "Your injuries aren't healed yet." Turning toward the voice, I was surprised to see a man sitting nearby. His strong features bore a striking resemblance to Andrew's, but his presence was far more composed and commanding. It took me only a moment to recognize him, Christopher Carter, Andrew's older brother. Relief flooded through me at the sight of him, and the tension in my chest eased slightly. Despite the circumstances, I managed a weak smile. "You made it back safely, I said, my voice soft but sincere. Christopher raised an eyebrow at my words, a faint hint of warmth breaking through his otherwise stoic expression. "Was the anonymous message from you?" he asked, his tone calm but filled with curiosity. I nodded in response, watching as his intrigue deepened. "How did you know someone tampered with my private jet?" he continued. "And why did you decide to help me?" His questions carried no accusation, only genuine interest and gratitude. Meeting his steady gaze, I decided to answer honestly. "Would you believe me if I told you I dreamed about it?" I said softly. "As for why I wanted to save you, the answer is simple. You're my fiancé." My words left him momentarily stunned, his sharp eyes widening in surprise. But after a brief pause, he nodded slowly. "I believe you," he said with conviction. His calm acceptance catching me off guard. Realizing he had been the one to save me, I looked at him with gratitude and curiosity. "Thank you for rescuing me," I said. "But why were you there in the first place?" Christopher's gaze didn't waver as he explained. "After receiving your message, I was skeptical, but I'm not someone who takes risks lightly. I had the jet inspected thoroughly, and the mechanics found evidence of tampering. Naturally, I became suspicious of the person who sent the warning, you." He hesitated briefly before adding, "I had someone investigate you. At first, I just wanted to meet the person behind the message. But when I found you injured and unconscious, helping you became my priority." Christopher looked at me with calm assurance as he said, "I brought you to the hospital." His words made me curious. "Why didn't you suspect me?" I asked cautiously. He gave me a faint smile, one that carried both warmth and trust. "Instinct," he replied simply. "I trust that my fiancé isn't the type of person to do something malicious." His answer left me momentarily stunned. A small, mutual smile passed between us, and for the first time, I felt a genuine sense of admiration for Christopher. Unlike Andrew, who was arrogant and self-centered, Christopher was honest, humble, and kind. Once I was discharged from the hospital, Christopher accompanied me back to the Carter family estate. That evening, the Carters and the Johnsons hosted a small banquet. The grand entrance of the hall buzzed with activity as guests arrived, their laughter and chatter filling the air. Andrew stood by the door, greeting everyone with his usual polished charm. But the moment Christopher and I entered arm in arm, the expression on Andrew's face froze. His complexion turned ghostly pale, and he stared at us as though he had just seen a phantom. "Big brother?" Andrew stammered, his voice trembling. How are you here? Are you a ghost?" His reaction was almost comical, but it also carried an undercurrent of something darker, genuine fear. Christopher and I exchanged a brief glance before looking back at Andrew. His wide-eyed panic gave me pause, and in that instant, something clicked in my mind. Andrew had been reborn, just like me. It all made sense now. The way Anna had stayed in the country instead of leaving, Andrew's obsessive protectiveness over her, and his peculiar wariness toward me. Andrew's gaze shifted toward Christopher, filled with suspicion and accusation. I could see the gears turning in his mind as he tried to make sense of what he was witnessing. He likely suspected Christopher of having tampered with the private jet to frame him or to remove him as a rival. In families as wealthy and powerful as the Carters, sibling rivalries were not uncommon. However, Andrew's paranoia stemmed from his own past actions. In our previous life, he had knowingly let Christopher's plane crash without lifting a finger to stop it. That memory alone told me how far Andrew would go to protect his interests. Despite already being aware of Andrew's selfishness and malice, he always found ways to exceed my expectations. His capacity for cruelty and manipulation seemed boundless. As the evening progressed, Christopher excused himself to the study, presumably to investigate further into the sabotage of his private jet. I didn't press him for details, choosing instead to wait in the lounge while a makeup artist prepared me for the banquet. The soft brush of makeup against my skin and the quiet hum of conversation in the background helped soothe my nerves, until the door suddenly burst open. Andrew stormed into the room without warning, his fury palpable. Without so much as a word to the makeup artist, he shoved her aside and grabbed my wrist roughly. His grip was tight enough to bruise, and his eyes blazed with unchecked anger. "Emma Johnson," he spat, his voice low and venomous. "I'm warning you, stay away from Anna. If you harm her again, I won't just come after you. I'll destroy your entire family. Do you hear me?" His threats, coupled with the venom in his tone, reignited the intertwined anger and pain I had carried from both my past and present lives. Summoning every ounce of strength I had, I yanked my wrist free from his grasp. The fire of defiance burned in my chest as I raised my hand and slapped him hard across the face. The sound echoed sharply through the room. Andrew staggered back, his cheek rapidly reddening with the imprint of my hand. He glared at me, his eyes filled with barely restrained rage, but I refused to cower under his gaze. My voice was steady as I said, "Who gave you permission to enter this room? Get out." For the first time, Andrew was the one left speechless, his anger unable to overpower the sting of humiliation. Andrew raised his hand as though he was going to strike me, but when he met my furious gaze, he hesitated. For a moment, there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. His hand dropped slowly, and his voice lost some of its harshness, though it still carried a condescending tone. "I know you're only acting this way because you like me," he said, his words dripping with arrogance. "You're desperate to marry me. If you promise not to hurt Anna again, I'll allow today's engagement to happen without holding it against you. But remember your place," he continued, his sense of self-importance growing with each word. "Once we're engaged, you'll be my fiancé in name only. Your role will be to play along and stay out of Anna's way. Don't even think about crossing her again." His words were like a slap in the face, but I stayed silent, my anger simmering beneath the surface. "Even if my father forces me to marry you one day, my heart will always belong to Anna," he said, as if I didn't already know. Andrew's tone shifted slightly, as though he was granting me a great favor. "Once we're married, we'll live together. I'll bring Anna into our home, and you'll help cover for her. You'll praise her in front of my father and make him accept her quickly. Do you understand?" His gaze remained cold, as if everything he was saying was a kindness. But the next part was worse. He added, "If you do all of this, I might occasionally come home to have a child with you, but don't expect anything more. My heart will only ever belong to Anna." It was almost laughable how sure he was of himself. The way he spoke as if everything was already decided, as if I would happily accept this arrangement, was infuriating. "The Carter family fortune will go to my children with Anna, not yours," he continued. "But if you behave well, I might consider letting your family invest in Carter Industries. I have knowledge of the future trends in the market, and I know where the industry is headed for the next few decades." Listening to his absurd monologue, I couldn't help but sneer internally. Did he really believe that his rebirth had granted him some sort of omniscience? Did he think he could control everything just because he had lived through it once before? I couldn't wait to see how his blind arrogance would come crashing down around him. He truly believed that he could replicate his past life's path, as if the world would never change. But even the smallest change could alter the course of everything, and I was eager to see him learn that lesson the hard way. When he finished speaking, Andrew straightened himself up and left the lounge, no doubt proud of his little speech. Watching him walk away, I couldn't suppress the cold smile that curled on my lips. His words, so full of self-importance, only made me feel more certain of my decision. Not long after he left, Christopher entered the room with a stack of documents in hand. He had changed into a perfectly tailored white suit that made him look like a prince from a fairy tale, tall and elegant. He reached out his hand to me, and without thinking, I placed mine in his. His touch was warm and steady, a sharp contrast to Andrew's cold, rough grip. Christopher led me to the banquet hall, his presence calm and reassuring. As we entered together, I noticed Andrew's eyes immediately turned toward us. His face darkened as he saw us walking arm in arm, his anger boiling just beneath the surface. Despite his anger, Andrew managed to maintain his composure in front of the guests. He pulled out the chair beside him, gesturing for me to sit with an air of smugness, as if I would happily take the seat he offered. But I refused. I didn't even spare him a glance as I walked past him and sat down in the chair that Christopher had pulled out for me. The look on Andrew's face as he watched me sit beside Christopher was priceless. His anger barely contained, while I couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of satisfaction. Andrew's face twisted in barely contained rage as he shot me a warning glance. He quickly lowered his head and typed something rapidly on his phone. Within moments, I felt my own phone buzz, signaling a new message. When I opened it, the words from Andrew were clear. "Emma Johnson, stop playing these little games to get my attention. I'm not falling for it. This is your final warning. Don't do anything unnecessary or this engagement will be canceled immediately. You won't even have the title of my fiancé left." I couldn't help but be amused by his delusions. He honestly believed that a few angry words from him could control my actions. Without a second thought, I blocked him and set my phone down on the table. Christopher, who had been quietly watching me, noticed the small movement. He leaned in slightly and asked, his voice gentle, "Is everything okay?" I smiled faintly, trying to hide the satisfaction I felt. "It's nothing, just someone irrelevant, already dealt with." Christopher nodded in understanding and began placing food onto my plate. He waited until I had taken a bite before speaking again. "If there's anything you can't handle, let me know. It's my responsibility as your fiancé to take care of any trouble for you." His words, so sincere and calm, made my heart skip a beat. There was something so comforting about his presence. I felt my ears grow warm, realizing how much I admired him. He was the kind of person I wanted by my side. Soon, he would officially be my fiancé, and I couldn't help but smile at the thought. As I lowered my head, I caught his eye and gave him a knowing smile. The exchange between Christopher and me only seemed to fuel Andrew's fury. He glared at his phone, then tried sending me another message, but when he saw that I had blocked him, his anger exploded. His face turned crimson and he began typing furiously, his frustration evident in every movement. As he sat there, consumed by his emotions, something unexpected happened. Anna, disguised as a server, snuck into the banquet hall. Andrew immediately grabbed her and pulled her to his side. His sudden and bold gesture caused a stir among the guests, and all eyes turned toward them. Anna, caught off guard, lowered her head and blushed, pretending to shy away from the attention. The guests, however, were quick to catch on to what was happening. Whispers spread through the crowd, and many looked at Andrew and Anna with disdain. It was clear to everyone that bringing a mistress to such an important family event was a huge mistake, one that tarnished the Carter family's reputation. Andrew, still lost in his anger, sent another message to me, blocking me on WeChat. "You've got some nerve," the message read. "Just wait. I'm going to announce in front of everyone that I will never marry you. The only woman I will ever marry is Anna, even if it means giving up my place as the heir to the Carter family. That will never change." I could only watch coldly as Andrew threw his tantrum, feeling no sympathy for his childish outburst. Without a second thought, I blocked Andrew's phone number. I could almost feel his rage intensifying as he realized what I had done. The look on his face was a mix of disbelief and fury, but I was no longer concerned. I had made my decision, and there was no going back. Soon after, Mr. Carter, the head of the family, stepped up to the stage to give a brief welcome speech. His presence instantly commanded attention as he began to speak, thanking everyone for coming. Then, without wasting any time, he made an important announcement that shocked everyone. "I am pleased to announce the union between the Carter and Johnson families," he said, his voice firm and resolute. As the room erupted in polite applause, Andrew, who had been simmering with anger, stormed onto the stage, dragging Anna behind him. Holding Anna's hand high in the air, he declared, "Anna Lewis is my one true love. I will never marry anyone but her." If I am forced into an arranged marriage with Emma Johnson, I would rather sever ties with the Carter family than compromise. Anna, standing next to him, looked up at the audience with a soft smile of triumph, nestling into Andrew's embrace. Together, they stared at me, expecting to see the heartbreak they had anticipated. They were so sure of my despair, but they couldn't have been more wrong. Instead of showing any reaction to their public declaration, I remained utterly calm, my expression unreadable. Andrew's satisfaction began to fade as he realized I wasn't responding the way he had expected. Confusion slowly crept into his features, and he found himself unable to grasp why I wasn't reacting to his dramatic rejection. Even the guests, who had been eagerly watching the spectacle, didn't give him the response he was hoping for. Instead of admiring his supposed undying love for Anna, the crowd's eyes were filled with disdain. They saw him for what he truly was, a man making a fool of himself in front of everyone. The only person truly enraged by the scene was Mr. Carter. He had always taken the family business seriously, and with the alliance between the Carter and Johnson families being crucial at this moment, Andrew's outburst was unacceptable. Watching his younger son disgrace the family, especially when compared to Christopher, who stood so composed and capable, was the final straw for Mr. Carter. His anger was palpable as he stood there, his face hardening in frustration. After a brief moment of silent contemplation, Mr. Carter stepped onto the stage, completely ignoring Anna, who was still nestled in Andrew's arms. He took the microphone, his voice steady but carrying an undeniable weight. "Welcome, everyone, to the engagement banquet between the Carter and Johnson families," he began. "Before the ceremony continues, I have two important announcements to make." He paused, looking over at Andrew with a cold and unforgiving gaze. "First, the person engaged to Miss Emma Johnson has always been my eldest son, Christopher Carter. Second, the future heir to the Carter family will remain Christopher Carter." Mr. Carter's eyes bore into Andrew as he spoke, his tone unwavering. "Since Andrew wishes to renounce his ties to the Carter family in pursuit of his so-called true love, I hereby declare that from this moment onward, Andrew Carter is no longer a member of this family." The room fell into stunned silence, and the weight of Mr. Carter's words sank in. It was clear that the decision had been made. Andrew was no longer welcome in the family. Andrew's expression, once full of pride, crumbled before our eyes. His face went pale, and disbelief spread across it as he stared at his father. It was clear he could not grasp what had just occurred. Anna, too, was shaken. Her eyes flickered from Andrew to Christopher, who stood beside me, and then to me. She looked as if she could not accept the turn of events, her expression full of reluctance and frustration. To prevent Andrew from causing any further disruption, Mr. Carter made the decision to have both Andrew and Anna removed from the banquet. As the two were forcibly escorted out, Andrew remained frozen, his mind still struggling to process the drastic change in his life. His entire world had been flipped upside down in that single moment. In the past, he had been the unquestioned heir to the Carter fortune. Now everything had shifted. His brother was back, and he had lost his position, his fiancé, and his place in the family. Inside the banquet hall, the celebration carried on as if nothing had happened. Guests continued to congratulate Christopher and me, offering their well wishes and gifts. The joyous atmosphere inside stood in stark contrast to the fury brewing outside. There, Andrew seethed in anger. Unable to shake the sense of injustice that clouded his mind, he could feel the weight of his loss pressing down on him, bitterness rising in his chest. In his eyes, everything had been taken from him, even Emma, whom he now felt should have been his, no matter what. Andrew's mind was consumed with hatred. His thoughts centered on the idea that, even if I didn't want to be with him, I should have belonged to him forever. His frustration deepened as he watched the engagement ceremony from a distance, his resentment growing stronger. Meanwhile, he remained oblivious to Anna's changing feelings. Though she stood beside him, her gaze wasn't on him. It was directed toward Christopher, filled with admiration, not toward the man she had once clung to. Despite Andrew's rage, life moved on. After our engagement, the alliance between the Johnson and Carter families grew stronger. The cooperation between our two families brought about mutual trust and respect. Together, we weathered economic challenges and became the dominant forces in Riverdale's business scene. Christopher focused on his work with dedication, while our relationship only deepened over time, strengthened by the trust we shared. I, too, was far from idle. My guard remained firmly up, especially when it came to Andrew. I knew that he wouldn't accept defeat so easily, and I was certain he would eventually try to get back at me. But I wasn't afraid. He might have his memories of the past, but I had mine as well. And I had the advantage of having lived far longer than he had in our previous lives. I wasn't going to wait for him to make his move. I decided it was time for me to take action, cutting off any chance he had of regaining his influence. One day, I received news of a large anonymous investment aimed at developing a remote and desolate mountain. A smile tugged at my lips as I realized who was behind it. Andrew had put all his hopes into this project, believing it would be the key to his future success. The mountain, though barren and insignificant now, had great potential. Both of us knew that, with the right investments, it could become the economic heart of the region, with land values skyrocketing in the years to come. I decided to take advantage of his obsession with the project. I arranged for a competitor to enter the bidding process, driving the price higher and higher, pushing Andrew closer to his financial limits. As the bidding price reached a point where it could break his bank, I ordered the bidding to stop. It was exactly what I had anticipated. Andrew, unwilling to lose the opportunity, threw all his remaining resources into securing the land. Andrew succeeded in winning the bid, but just as he was preparing to begin development, I made my move. I sent an anonymous letter to the National Archaeological Team, tipping them off about the possibility of an imperial tomb buried beneath the mountain. In our previous lives, Andrew had been the one to end my life, and my soul had lingered full of regret and a desire for justice. I watched helplessly as everything I once knew fell apart. Andrew's eventual financial collapse, his desperate attempts to reclaim his power, and the discovery of the tomb. This time, I was not going to let him repeat the past. My actions ensured the tomb was discovered before he could even start construction. The government was thrown into chaos as they were forced to choose between preserving the ancient historical treasure and honoring the massive financial investments that had already been made. The conflict stirred public outrage, and Andrew's carefully laid plans quickly began to fall apart. His name was dragged through the mud as the people turned on him. I had taken the necessary steps to prevent Andrew from benefiting from his greed, and now I could watch as everything crumbled around him. The news of the discovery spread quickly, and all development on the land came to an immediate halt. The archaeological team moved in, setting up their operations on the site. As long as they were excavating, no further construction could take place. Andrew's dreams of riches and success had been crushed before they could even begin. With the site effectively blocked off, Andrew stood helplessly as his financial empire began to unravel. Investors quickly pulled out, realizing the potential for profit was now non-existent. His money evaporated, and the once promising project turned into a symbol of his failure. Unable to recover, Andrew's debt began to mount. He was soon unable to repay a significant sum, and his name was added to the bank's blacklist, effectively isolating him from society. He couldn't even book a flight or train ticket, and his reputation was forever tarnished. The once arrogant and powerful heir of the Carter family had been reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale. His failure was complete, and my revenge was finally realized. This time, Andrew's arrogance had cost him everything, and there was no one left to rescue him. The consequences of his past actions had caught up with him, leaving him to face the consequences of his greed and pride. Once Andrew had lost everything, Anna was the first to turn her back on him. She took the last of his money, pretending to feel sorry for him, and tried to approach Christopher, hoping for his sympathy. But Christopher wasn't easily fooled. He saw right through her manipulative behavior and refused to have anything to do with her, sending her back to Andrew without hesitation. Desperate and filled with anger, Andrew's mind finally cracked. Overcome with fury, he killed Anna in a fit of rage. He strangled her to death before gruesomely dismembering her body and discarding the pieces in a sewer. When her remains were discovered, Andrew had already vanished, leaving no trace behind. I had a feeling deep down that Andrew would eventually return to settle things with me. Taking no chances, I contacted the police and reported my suspicions, knowing it wouldn't be long before Andrew showed up again. Sure enough, he reappeared, and as soon as he did, the police apprehended him without delay. His bloodshot eyes locked onto mine as he was dragged away. Tears streamed down his face as he begged for my forgiveness, his voice trembling with regret. "I was blind," he pleaded. "I loved the wrong person. I've wronged you. Please, Emma, forgive me." Give me one more chance. I swear I love you. I'll treat you well. I remained completely unmoved by his words, my expression cold and distant. There was nothing on my face, not a hint of emotion, just as he had looked at me countless times in our past life, empty and uncaring. The moment he saw the indifference in my eyes, he stopped struggling. His body stiffened, and I knew he had realized the truth. I, too, had been reborn. He understood then that no amount of begging would change anything. In his last attempt to end things on his terms, Andrew pulled a box cutter from his clothes and, in a final act of desperation, slit his own throat. Blood poured from the wound as he collapsed to the ground. With his dying breath, he muttered to himself, "I'll do it right next time. Next time, I'll make the right choices." I stared at his lifeless body, his eyes still wide open in disbelief. There was no next time for him. As I looked away from Andrew's body, I realized there was nothing left for me to regret. In this life, I had already achieved everything I wanted. I had made my peace, and now, as I turned my gaze to Christopher waiting for me in the distance, I felt a calm sense of closure. This was my life now, and there wouldn't be another chance to live it differently.